Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 82, recording on Friday, May 9th. It's rookie minicamp day. I'll be out at TCO. Cannot wait for that. Got a guest for you today. His name is Robert Mays. He's the host of the Athletic Football Show, one of my colleagues at the Athletic. He sees the big picture in the NFL better than most and always is interested in the Vikings. So thank you guys. We'll enjoy the conversation. A lot of thoughts about, the run game, J.J. McCarthy, expectations, Brian Flores defense, what maybe could be different this year, a host of topics. So really enjoyed getting to talk to Robert as usual. Looking forward to that. I was at the Wolves game last night. I've been to game 1 and game 2. Game 2 was much better than game 1. Still didn't get the juice from Ant that I think is expected or will be expected moving forward. But it's hard to imagine. I mean, without Steph Curry, the Warriors' offense was incredibly difficult to watch. I'm going to have a story on Nickeil Alexander-Walker for Saturday, so look for that. And then we'll have comprehensive coverage of the rookie camp over at The Athletic, so stay tuned for that. As always, this show is presented by First Resource Bank. That's a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area. Great people over there. Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson. They run the thing. They're Vikings fans. They're awesome to talk to. There was a guy at the Wolves game who yelled out, "Alec Lewis!" So we got listeners everywhere. We need First Resource bankers everywhere. So please go check them out in the description below. If you're new here watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. It helps us out. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, you can rate, review, follow, all of that good stuff. But let's not waste any more time. I'll probably have some thoughts Saturday morning on rookie camp over on the YouTube page at minimum. So you can come back for that. But let's get into the conversation right now with Robert Mays, the host of the Athletic Football Show. Robert, welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. How you doing, man?
Doing well, buddy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. You were the first guest back when I had no idea what I was doing back in July. Now that it's this, beautiful production, 80-something shows into this, it's good to have you back. You been getting any time away? New restaurants? Anything great? I was thinking about you because there's a spot here, French spot, Boucheron, that I am supposed to go to pretty soon. But it's a James Beard finalist, and I'm like, if this is good, I probably got to get you the rec for when you're here in the fall.
Minnesota, Minneapolis, and just the Twin Cities in general, that is the American city that I lament my lack of time there. Like every time I'm in the Twin Cities, it's usually for 24 to 48 hours. Like often it's training camp or some other very quick trip. And it's taken me a while to start hitting the restaurants I want to. Like I couldn't go to Awamini for like 3 years because it was not open on Monday, I think. And I was always there on a Monday. And there's so many places there I want to try. So I've said this many times, and I truly believe it. Like the Twin Cities has the most underrated food city in America. So I'm just playing to the crowd right now, but I truly do believe that.
Yeah, great move by you to start out. You could have just said J.J. McCarthy's going to be absolutely unbelievable, and you'd have won them over. But that'll do it for some people. I agree. I did not, moving up here, expect it to be what it is. We'll get to the Vikings and not food, even though you and I probably could talk about it for a long time. You're usually fascinated by this team. Like, I'll see you at the combine, and we'll have an athletic meeting and be outside the ballroom for lunch, and you're like, it's so interesting. It's like every year we have that little thing with this team. Are you fascinated with them now? And if so, why?
I guess the most fascinating part of this offseason, and I think the reason for that is over the last 3-4 years, I think that there have been a lot of experimental conditions associated with the Vikings, right? Like, so even last year, the idea of figuring out whether you want to pay Kirk or move on from Kirk, you're picking a little bit later in the draft. So how are you going to find your quarterback? Are you going to have to maneuver for one? Lucky for them, the draft fell in a way that they didn't have to move up very much. They had the second first round pick to take Dallas Turner. So I think that's why I've been so interested in them, is that the way that Kwesi has approached this, I think, just in conversations with him in the past and in observing the way that they've approached all of this kind of stuff, I just appreciate them as like, again, a team with like experimental conditions, like sitting there and having to choose whether or not you want to roll with JJ McCarthy or roll with Sam Darnold because of what Sam Darnold did last year. As somebody who has to talk about football and make football content all of the time, that's easy, right? Like that argument, you take a theory about how you should approach the position and then you actually get to watch it play out. And I just think there have been a lot of examples with that team over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about, I remember, again, outside the ballroom, we talked about like the moving on from Kirk and wanting to draft a guy. And then, you're right. The fact that JJ got to them at them picking at 10 and the Giants didn't pull the trigger there is a sliding doors moment that is always semi-relevant. But I mean, we'll talk about this offseason specifically. I know you touched on it on the show at times, but I mean, obviously you remember well the Rams game and the way that ended, and Kevin O'Connell that night did not mince words in saying that they wanted to solidify the interior of the pocket. Newsflash, they've done that. Ryan Kelly, Will Fries, potentially Donovan Jackson at left guard at the get-go. We'll see. And then on the defensive side, obviously with Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave, I'm just curious from your perspective, what you've thought of the execution of that vision that was laid out that night in a very surly Kevin O'Connell press conference in Glendale, Arizona.
I'm not surprised to see what they've done along the offensive line. I think that we've seen this path that has become a little bit well-worn for guys of this coaching tree. Sean McVay had to do it. A lot of these guys have had to walk this path where, you get preoccupied, maybe the wrong word, but you spend a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of mental bandwidth on building your passing game, right? Like that's the fun part of all of this. And, McVay, I think, has been open up about it. And I've talked with him about this in the past. Like they let the running game atrophy in 21 and 22, even when they were really good on offense. They won the Super Bowl and their running game was horrendous. And so I think that because they won the Super Bowl, they didn't address it as quickly as they probably should have. And then they got to the 23 season and they had to make wholesale changes to the way that they ran the ball. And I think part of it was driven, I think part of the personnel choices there were driven by the desire to be more of a downhill run team. They go trade for Kevin Dotson. They draft Steve Avila in the second round. Just the sheer amount of bulk on their interior changed, and they changed the structure of their running game. The Vikings are, for the most part, still a team that it's more zone than gap scheme stuff, and they don't have that kind of downhill physical running game that other teams have started to develop. And I think it may have taken them a couple years to get there, but I think they went through a similar sort of process. Integrity in the pocket is one benefit of the way that they've built, but now hopefully you can be a little bit more flexible and press the issue a little bit more in the running game in a way that they weren't able to in the back half of last year.
And over the last few years, I mean, there have been so many conversations where it's talking like, well, we'll use CJ Ham as more of an insert type player. Well, they only run 21 personnel 15% of the time. And then it's, hopefully we'll be, last year. And I remember you putting this on social media at the time, but play style was a conversation everywhere. Kevin O'Connell used that word like he was making $100 per usage of the word with how often that was said from the very beginning. And I mean, the offseason prior, it was signing Josh Oliver, who is an incredible blocking tight end. But at some point, I wrote this at some point last year, it's like you can try to pull all these levers, but if the one lever you haven't pulled is the interior offensive line, and it's been, Blake Brandell in for Ezra Cleveland and Dalton Reisner in for Ed Ingram, like at some point, fortifying that spot is going to be integral. And it is going to be interesting to see kind of, you were going there of like, is it going to be more of a gap scheme specific style? Are they going to motion more in the run game to create advantages than they have in the past? And it feels like, we could talk about JJ McCarthy, and we will, because it's integral to what they want to accomplish. But this is a spot in terms of the run game that you've been interested in, that I've thought about a lot over the last 3 years.
I remember sitting, the exact spot, sitting there at the facility on the little concrete bench, a little concrete area there, right when you go into the locker room. And I was talking to one of their offensive coaches last year during training camp, and kind of asking him questions about this. It's like, what are you guys going to do to be maybe a little bit more assertive and physical on offense, especially when you're trying to run the ball? And I think that their method last year was essentially like, we're going to emphasize being physical more than we have in the past. And that sounds great, but I think that has limitations. And I think that we saw those limitations last year. At a certain point, I think you need to commit yourself personnel-wise in order to fully realize those pivot points and the growth in that area. And again, I think it took them a little bit, but I think they have come to that conclusion in the way that other teams have had to do it in the past.
No question. And I mean, just speaking offense broadly, I mean, the amount that they're spending is kind of jarring. It's like at the receiver position, obviously, with Justin Jefferson being paid what he is, the tackles, Christian Darrisaw was extended, massive deal. Brian O'Neill, I think his cap hit is third most at right tackle in the league. They paid the interior guys. They drafted in the first round. You know, they paid Aaron Jones $10 million. They acquired Jordan Mason. I mean, the spending on this offense gets you to a place where you can feel really good about it. And then, more than anything else, the most important aspect is obviously the kid who is coming off a torn meniscus, who was drafted where he was. And so, I mean, with JJ McCarthy, when you talk about him, or as in the future months, as you're going to talk about him, like, what is a feasible expectation with with this type of infrastructure? It's hard for me to put my finger on it. So I pose the uncertainty to you.
It's a good question. And I think part of the reason it's a good question is it plays into the choice that they made in deciding it was JJ McCarthy and not a more proven commodity, Sam Darnold, Aaron Rodgers, whatever it is. And so that answer of what is a successful season for JJ McCarthy, the answer has a lot of layers to it, because what is a successful season ultimately dictates whether you made the right decision. And I don't know the answer to that. And I think what complicates it is you won so many games last year. You were so surprising last year. If you win fewer games this year, let's say you win 11 games, you look at some of the advanced numbers, you have the 13th best offense in the league, and you get a wild card and lose in the first round. Is that a successful season for the 2025 Vikings based on what they did in 2024? I'd probably say yes. I don't know if fans would necessarily be confident or comfortable with that. And I think that's an optimistic spin.
Right.
Let's say he's not as good as you want him to be. You go 9-8 this year and miss the playoffs. I think I'm willing to stomach that. And I said that in the moment when they decided they were going to go with JJ McCarthy. I think you need to have this be a 2-year outlook where you're trying to win a Super Bowl in 2026, but that's not always easy for fans to stomach. Like the idea of even a small step back to take a larger step forward, it's a painful process when you're going through it in the moment.
Yeah, and I can just hear the folks listening to this like, oh, another wild card. Great. We get to the playoffs and another first round loss. And so now you have 4 years of this regime without one playoff win. And yes, we've had a ton of fun, the 13-win season in 2022 and the 14 wins last year and the Sam Darnold arc. And Kirk was in a great spot before he left. And we drafted JJ. We're all excited. But you got no playoff wins to show for it in a town, in a sports town that doesn't have a championship in its major four sports since the early 90s. So it is a very interesting conversation, because I think I'm where you are in terms of if we're thinking optimally, and you take this kind of 2 year, JJ gets his feet wet. He has, it's not going to be perfect, but throughout the season, he shows growth. He shows he can operate Kevin O'Connell's offense. And so going into 2026, you feel incredibly optimistic. It would be, I'd be okay with that. The hard part is you have a roster, and you know this very well, that is kind of as old as it is. And you have a team with, they are, at the bottom of most in terms of cap space for the 2026 year. And so, maximizing the now feels like integral kind of with how they've spent on this roster. Am I looking at it the wrong way?
I think that's true, but I also think that they've planned, probably to have this version of the roster for the next couple of years. And I think I always come back to the idea of, if you had paid Sam Darnold and Sam Darnold had maybe given you a better shot in 2025, or even if it's Aaron Rodgers and we'll give you a better shot in 2025. Well, if that falls short, were you going to be able to commit financially to Sam Darnold in 2026 combined with all the other things that you wanted to do? I'm looking at his contract right now. Sam Darnold, if you had just given him, if he had taken the deal he got from Seattle and the Vikings had given that to him, he has a $13.4 million cap hit this year. It's $34 million next year. Let's even say you move on after 2025 and it's just a dead hit in 2026. Well, that's $25 million. J.J. McCarthy has like a $4 million cap hit in each of the next 2 years. So you get $10 million in excess to spend this year and you get $20 million in excess to spend next year. Is the gap between Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy big enough to justify that gap in price and what you can do with that savings? I don't know. I don't think so. And I think that's kind of where I landed, and that's why I support what they've done. This was always the plan. And so even if you fall short this year, I think you should expect to fall short this year. If I were a Vikings fan, I think my hopefully rational approach to this would be I'm building to 2026. The idea of a first-year starter and a very young player being good enough for us to win a Super Bowl in year one, I think that's really, really difficult to do. But I think in year two, as everything else gets built up around him, you're going to bring a majority of this roster back based on the pieces you have into 2026. You'll have more draft capital next year again. I do think that 2-year window is probably what I would be looking at.
It was interesting. Before, we started recording, I looked this up, which I was curious. And it just kind of speaks to the infrastructure. But, 2022, the Vikings offense, 0.07 EPA per dropback. 2023, 0.06 EPA per dropback. 2024, 0.12 EPA per dropback. Like 4,000 passing yards each year. 30 touchdowns each year. And so, for me, even if as I ask these questions, like I'm toggling in my head, is it crazy to think that JJ could, come close to some of those numbers, considering that the infrastructure, allowed for that with both Kirk Cousins, with Josh Dobbs going back to 2023, with Sam Darnold last year? Like for me, I can't imagine that you have, in your experience covering this league, seen an infrastructure like this one for a quarterback at this age. Does anything come to mind in that regard as a comparison or rising to this level?
I think the best possible comparison would have been what Patrick Mahomes was dropped into in his second year with Andy Reid, right? If we think about development timeline, age, what year you are in the league, that's probably the best recent comparison. Mahomes didn't play at all as a rookie, so he got the exact same amount of on-field experience JJ did, even if he could practice. So I think that's probably comparable. Even somebody like Jordan Love had 3 years where he didn't play before playing for the first time. So he was 25 in his first year as a starter. I do think that time and the ability to mature probably plays into it. But that's probably Mahomes is obviously the best case scenario for how a situation like this can work out. No one should ever be hoping for that. Like the idea that J.J. McCarthy is going to throw 50 touchdowns to be the MVP next year. I'll be honest. I don't think that's on the table. And I don't think I'm raining on Vikings fans' parades by saying that. The other step down from that, Jordan Love threw for 4,100 yards and 32 touchdowns in 2023 in his first year as a starter. That feels like the most realistic best case scenario.
Right.
And I still feel like that's really, really, really difficult to do in year one, even in a good situation.
If he were to achieve that, you said raining on the Vikings parades. With the way that the Vikings fan base already feels about this guy, if he were to go out and accomplish the Jordan Love type first year arc, it would be ridiculous. To flip the conversation a little bit, because this is another guy I know you are interested in. And it just feels relevant because, whatever they accomplish, a lot of it is obviously going to hinge on Brian Flores' ability to, work. I don't want to say work magic because it hasn't been that. They've done a lot of, they've been very creative, very resourceful. In 2023, his first year, it was max coverage, max pressure, drop 8, all out blitz all the time. Last year, it was these, palms coveragey, zone coverage, mix and match. And it just, is it possible that Brian Flores, in your mind, like, can he do it again in some ways? Now, I know the personnel has obviously improved on the interior defensive line, and they're younger at cornerback, but for me, it becomes a question of, like, can he continue to, complicate things for offenses the way he seems to every single year?
It's funny when you were listing off all of the resources they've spent on the offense. I was just sitting there being like, "Oh, poor Brian Flores, man. Like, he's almost a victim of his own competence." Like, I think that's kind of what's happened, where they know he can do more with less, and so they're giving him less. I know they spent in free agency and have over the last couple of years, but the idea that they had one pick and they decided to spend it on the offense again, I think is very funny. To me, that what this comes down to is they've been weird because they've had to be weird to an extent, right? And like last year, I think the front has really good players that are almost accentuated by that play style, and then you're trying to paper over some of your issues at corner for the most part last year. Now, I think you have even better players up front, and so my hope would be, do we have to send as many bodies at the quarterback as we have over the last couple of years? Or are there moments where we can do some damage with 4, be a little bit sounder, and just ask a little bit less of the players on the back end? So I think that's kind of where I land with this. And one of the ideas I want to do at some point this offseason, we just haven't had time to do it. A listener asked me this question. I thought it was a very good one, is what is the playoff success for blitz heavy teams? Like, if you're a team that has to survive on blitzing, is that a situation where teams figure you out as you get into the postseason? Anecdotally, it feels like that's kind of what happened to the Vikings last year, and
that's the sentiment. Yeah.
If they can't get home with 4 again, is that going to happen again? I wonder if history actually would bear that out. But again, just kind of like the anecdotal feeling on it is, now if you have a situation where it's 3rd and 8 and you have Dallas Turner, Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard, Jonathan Allen, you don't have to be quite as weird or aggressive. And is that ultimately going to benefit you in the long run? My guess is that's kind of what they hope will happen.
Yeah, and it goes back. I mean, at the combine, Quasito admits it. He said 2 things, like, you got to be able to you protect the quarterback, and you got to be able to rush with 4. And it's like, they haven't. I mean, that has not been the Brian Flores approach. But I mean, you mentioned Dallas Turner there, and I think, like, nationally, I don't know. I mean, most people are probably fixated on JJ McCarthy, but with what they ended up trading and allocating to select Dallas Turner, his development feels like, I mean, it's probably more of a niche Vikings land conversation, but it's going to be a fascinating one here locally, because if he can give reprieve to guys like Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, who are phenomenal but played an obscene amount of snaps, it will give Brian Flores an ability, in the back end, an ability to be more sound, which is the verbiage you use.
There's no doubt. And if you look at the high draft picks they've spent on defense, it has not worked out for them for the most part. Going back like 3, 4, 5 years, on offense, the hit rate has been better. But based on what they gave up for Dallas Turner, he needs to become an excellent player to make good on that price tag. I'll ask you, I mean, this is something I'm interested in because, again, this team is like a weird fascination of mine. Have they given any satisfactory answers as to why he wasn't able to break into the lineup last year? I know they're excited about him heading into this year, but they almost kind of have to say that.
Right. No, they definitely have to say it, or else it's a disaster. But no, I mean, the answers given, the conversation given is just, Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel were both played close to an all-pro level, and so the amount of reps weren't there. I'll just say, too, and you know this, because you've talked to Brian Flores and you've observed his defense for a long time, but it takes an incredible degree of aptitude to play in this system, to do the things that Brian Flores wants these defenders to be able to do. And Brian Flores is also just big on trust. Like, he trusts Andrew Van Ginkel to the utmost degree, to where when Blake Cashman gets hurt, Andrew Van Ginkel is now the off-ball linebacker because he knows how to operate the defense in that way. And so, the answers are, it's hard to get a guy like Dallas Turner on the field when you've got the 2 guys in front of him. And also, like, this defense does take a level of aptitude. Now, the argument kind of throughout the season last year is, you are a defensive coordinator who is able to get as creative as anybody. So if this guy had to be on the field. If his talent, necessitated him absolutely being on the field, probably would have found a way to do that. But I am of the belief, and they've spoken optimistically, like you said, and they have to, but I am of the belief that, a guy who played for Nick Saban, who has the amount of kind of, just athletic talent that he does, that at some point the light's going to turn on. But I still have the question of, like, in what spot here? Because if you're rushing four and you're running four-man, you have more four-man fronts than they played with in the past, I don't expect them to be replacing Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel. So it still is a question of opportunity, probably.
We'll see what happens. I think that Andrew Van Ginkel is a very fun player. I think Andrew Van Ginkel with his hand in the dirt in a 4-man, 4-2 nickel front on 3rd and 8, like, that's not the best application of Andrew Van Ginkel. The hope is it might be the best application of Dallas Turner. As you were talking and just about veterans and smarts and just that being the most important component of this, it's not a one-to-one comparison, but I think an example where this is potentially the bad road is what happened with the Bengals, right? So the Bengals, when they had Joe Burrow, they draft Joe Burrow in the first round in 2021. Is that right? 2020.
Sounds right.
It's hard for me to remember. It doesn't matter. They went, so it's 2020. It's 2020. So, and then in year 2, Joe Burrow is in year 2 of his rookie contract, the exact same way that J.J. McCarthy is now.
Sure.
They use that excess savings to just spend an ungodly amount of money on the defense. So the entire defense is essentially made up of free agents outside of a couple examples, which is exactly the Vikings situation. Like, if you look at the depth chart right now, who are the homegrown Vikings defenders under the age of like 39? Josh Metellus, Mekhi Blackman, who we haven't really seen play that much.
Ivan Pace.
That's it. Everyone else is a stopgap, or like better than a stopgap, but a free agent signing you had to bring in. So that can work for a while. But in order to sustain that, especially when you're spending the amount of money that they're spending on defense or on offense, eventually you have to develop some of these guys in-house if you're going to be good for a long time, or you're going to maintain that level of play on that side of the ball. So while I get that argument, not being able to develop your young players, that has a pretty rough ending for the teams that have been unable to do it over the last few years.
There's no question. And the 2022 draft of, they trade down from 12 to 32. They draft Lewis Seen at safety. They use one of those extra picks on Andrew Booth Jr. Neither of those players are still on the roster. None of them contributed at all. Neither of them contributed at all. And then the 3rd round pick that year is Brian Asamoah, who's just a special teams player. The other 2nd rounder was Ed Ingram. That time period, just in that draft, I've said it a lot locally, like, you just wonder how much, how hard that has made things over the last few years. But if Dallas Turner can become, the Nick Bonito type player where he's that type of size and can have that level of production and versatility, things, you could probably be okay with that. I'll end you with this. Kevin Seifert, who lives here locally and he does an incredible job for ESPN. He tweeted the NFC North odds earlier today. Lions plus 135, Packers plus 275, Vikings plus 360, Bears plus 425. Is that, how have you thought about this division? I know you've thought about it because of there's a hat you're wearing and a helmet behind you, but where do you see the Vikings in this division?
I think it's so hard. It's so hard to determine because there's so much change in really important spots with 3 of these teams.
Exactly.
And I think it's change that you can absolutely get behind. But right now, if you gunned ahead, you have to pick the winner of the NFC North today, who would it be? And you asked me that. I'd pick the Packers just because they've had the least amount of turnover at the most important spots. Their head coach and their play caller their play caller, and their quarterback are all going to be back next year. You can't say that about any of the other 3 teams. So the Packers are probably the team I feel best about, even if they absolutely still have questions. The Lions deserve the benefit of the doubt, but think about all of the change that's happening in Detroit right now. You're swapping out both coordinators. We've seen what sort of volatility that could potentially add, and I think it's pretty clear that Ben Johnson was really, really good at what he did, and I could say the same thing about Aaron Glenn. And with the Vikings, no big deal. We're just swapping out our starting quarterback. They did it last year, and they won an unbelievable amount of games. So maybe that can happen again, and I think they deserve the benefit of the doubt, but I think that there's just a ton of uncertainty. The overall bar and level with pretty much all of these teams, I even throw the Bears in there if we haven't seen it, I think there's a justifiable level of optimism, but I think if you're trying to handicap this thing right now, based on all of the things that have been swapped out over the last 2 months, like, good luck to you. I just don't envy that process because I think it's really, really difficult to pin down. The Bears could be, if the Bears were the 5th best offense in the league, would that shock you?
Probably. I mean, I have an immense respect for Ben Johnson, and it comes from, I mean, I remember after the Vikings would play that team, talking to some of the Vikings staff about, how quick the Lions were able to make adjustments on the fly and how much of a challenge this Viking staff defensively, which I think so highly of, felt that Detroit and Ben Johnson was. Like, it's hard for me to put a real cap on that being possible. Frankly,
if you told me the Bears were like a top 5 offense by DVOA, I would be like, okay. If you told me they were the 25th best offense by DVOA, I'd be like, okay. I mean, I just think it's really, really difficult. We did a show on our feed this week, and it was just reevaluating our worst takes from the 2024 preseason, which I think is a fun exercise to do. Outside of the content, I think you learn some lessons by doing it. And you go back and you look at the teams we were either too high on or too low on. And the teams that were too low on, the 2 teams that I did not pick as top 10 offenses that finished as top 10 offenses were Washington and the Bucs. And because it's hard to know. We had never seen Cliff Kingsbury be solely an offensive coordinator in the NFL. We had never seen Liam Cohen be a play caller in the NFL.
Yeah.
Both of those guys did phenomenal jobs. Liam Cohen got a head coaching job. Cliff probably could have gotten one if he had interviewed for one. And it's just difficult to pin that stuff down. And so you have Ben Johnson, 3 new offensive linemen. There are just so many different things happening that I think there's a lot of volatility with the Bears. And I think you could say the same thing about the Lions and the Vikings, even though they've maintained some elements of who they are.
I mean, I will have an immense appreciation if Detroit can swap both coordinators and maintain that level of just creativity and consistency. I will be pretty blown away. And then, I mean, the Packers, they're a very interesting team to me in terms of, Jeff Hafley in his second season with that defense, what they have at certain spots. I mean, obviously adding Matthew Golden to that offense, I have an incredible amount of just reverence for what they do in the run game. So it's going to be, I mean, Kevin Sweet said, to be fair, it's the most competitive divisional odds in the NFL, which feels very right with the conversation we just had. But it's going to be fascinating to watch. And I started with this team being fascinating, and the division is as a whole. So looking forward to it, as I'm sure you very much are as well.
I think the AFC West to me is really interesting based on the coaches that we have now, the quarterbacks that we have now. Like I don't know why, but ever since draft night, when we were sitting there on night 2 and I was sitting next to Dane, and the Raiders took Jack Besh in the second round after they had taken Ashton Genty, I'm like, am I fascinated by the Las Vegas Raiders? Like, I'm a Geno guy, so I'm very interested in watching that team, but I still think there are certain tiers and there's a certain order with the way the AFC West will probably go. Even if you think the Raiders are going to be good, I still am not sure I would pick them to win the AFC West. With the NFC North, I think it's competitive and intriguing, and I truly think any ordering of the teams is on the table. I think the Bears are the least likely team to win the division, but if you just stacked up like every single permutation of how the division could finish, I think that you could convince yourself all of them were possible.
No question. And I thought, I mean, you speaking about, the Jordan Love kind of, his first season and that production, 4,000 yards, 30, like that being the best, like if JJ McCarthy were to accomplish that, I mean, the credit would go a lot of places, but that the Vikings fan, I mean, this podcast be doing really well at that point. If that's the season that they have. Robert, appreciate you hopping on.
But look at what Darnold did. That's the thing with this team is that it's like, oh man, it'd be hard to imagine JJ McCarthy having that sort of season. And then look at what Sam Darnold did last year. And so I think that adds to just how hard this is to predict.
in an infrastructure that wasn't as good as this one is. The interior of the offensive line, if healthy, I mean, that's why I've said here locally, if JJ McCarthy can produce close to the ceiling level, possibility, and they can stay healthy the way they have, whether it's luck variance or whether it's Tyler Williams having a magic touch with performance and health, if those two things can happen, I mean, who knows? And I mean, again, to have an interior of the pocket that's going to be more formidable, you still have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. You have a healthier TJ Hockenson for a longer, span of the season, and you have definitely a better 1-2 punch at running back with Jordan Mason. You can convince yourself in a way that I know a lot of the people listening to this show are, and they should, because the possibilities are fun. Robert, thanks for hopping on. Great, job with the food take to begin, but appreciate you taking the time. Hopefully you get some time off in the near future.
Thanks, buddy. Good to talk to you.
And that'll do it for episode 82 of the Alec Lewis Show. Appreciate you guys being here. Always grateful for Robert's time. He sees the field very well and is very mindful of things from a big picture view. So hope you guys enjoyed that. I thought the benchmarks for like the ultimate ceiling and what JJ could accomplish is pretty good. And I'll have that in mind probably, and imagine you guys will as well. Like I said at the top, I'm going to have a story on N'Keal Alexander-Walker of the Timberwolves on Saturday at The Athletic, so please check that out. And then we'll have comprehensive coverage of rookie minicamp on Friday. We're getting to meet some of these guys. Looking forward to doing that. So you can follow all of that stuff over at the website. Check out First Resource Bank, who sponsors the show. We always appreciate them for what they do in the local community and how, simple and easy their online banking platform is and how great they are in person. So please go, it's so easy to set up an account with First Resource Bank. You won't be disappointed. And then if you made it all this way watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. And if you're listening on audio, you can follow and all that good stuff. So appreciate you guys being here. That's episode 82. Enjoy the weekend. Phenomenal weather weekend. Maybe some golf sprinkled in. I may or may not be out on the course somewhere in the local area, but enjoy it. And we will catch you guys on the flip side very, very soon.